Ellen's going to be talking about job architecture and how that is the cornerstone of a skills-based organization. So Ellen, over to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Following David Green, no pressure. One of our progressive thought leaders. So thank you so much for introducing me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming to my hometown, New York City. It's Diamond sponsored, girl's best friend. I'm head of strategic workforce strategy at Talent Neuron, and I help clients work through all types of scenarios, whether it's skills-based organizations, strategic workforce planning, or how to build a people analytics department. And I say this to you because inevitably in any of those paths, clients will come to us and say, where do I start? What do you think is the most foundational thing that I need to do in any of those paths? And my answer is jazzy job architecture. That I get jazzed up about it. I'm a bit of a skills geek, admittedly, and I think this is really where you see the magic of skills come alive through job architecture, and that's what we'll be talking about. So, you're no strangers to the headlines. Skills, skills, skills. There's not enough of them. Which ones do we need? We have a shortage. We need to upskill. We need to reskill. This is the era of AI disruption, and skills are at the center as a possible solution to combat the changes, the shortages, and building of new capabilities. So when you think about all of these headlines, again, where do you start? I had a client actually just this week ask me, we just need skills, right? Like jobs are going away. And my answer is no. Skills require structure and signal, and that comes in the form of building roles. And when you think about roles, this is a screenshot from our platform of Talent Neuron. Think about a data scientist. This bubble of skills are all adjacent skills that are associated with being a data scientist. If you think about building a role, now it's becoming more and more complicated. If I'm building a role for a data scientist, depending on where it sits in my organization, which one of these adjacent skills should be in the job description? Not only which one should it be in, represented by the bubbles of how predominant it is in the market, but where are the skills going? What is the evolution of them? What are new skills? About 1% of the market that's signaling there's some new skills coming out. We're going to monitor that to see if they become more and more relevant. What are emerging skills? They're becoming more relevant. They're becoming a bigger percentage of requirements for a data scientist. What are growing skills? They're showing a steady incline. And then what are the core skills? What are things that we just know intrinsically will not go away from, being a data scientist? And most importantly, what are declining skills? You might think of declining skills as obsolete, but not necessarily. Declining skills also give you the signal that, there's some table stakes skills that we don't even mention anymore. For example, back in the day, Microsoft Office used to be a required skill. Today, you wouldn't really put that in a job description. It's not declining in terms of it's not in the job description. It's now just table stakes. So when you're thinking about skills and how they're tethered to roles, you got to think about it in a dynamic way. Things are changing all the time, and skills are evolving. So building roles requires understanding the dynamic nature of where skills are going. So how do you organize this? Well, you're all people analytics folks. Skills form into roles, roles form into job families, and guess what comes next? Job architecture. They live in job architecture. If you think about, just skipped a little quickly. Can I go back? Here we go. Job architecture. It's the framework and the strategic tool that you use to keep track of all of your roles. It should be a living thing. It's not a static, once I do it, the rewards department handles it, puts it away, it starts collecting dust. It really needs to be a dynamic, living, strategic tool in your organization, and it powers so much of your talent value chain. And when you power it with the most progressive skills, again, that's where the magic happens, and it opens up a lot of capabilities. If you want to think about it architecturally, since we're talking about job architecture, I got inspired to put it into this framework. So think of job architecture as the cornerstone. It's really holding up your capabilities. Think of skills as the keystone. It's holding up the arch with the cornerstones. And at the top, your capabilities are the capstone. That's where you really see roles coming alive. And it's just an easy way for me to kind of think about this. So, you know job architecture is important. You know it's dynamic. How do you build it? So let's talk about that. My quick 4-step solution is identify your capabilities. And David actually just mentioned that previously. Design the right roles, and we can help you do that. Think of that skills adjacency map that we showed you, right? We can help you design which one of those skills need to go into your job. Future-proof it. So again, don't just let it sit there and collect dust because the world is moving very quickly. You need to continuously future-proof those jobs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then maintain it in a dynamic job architecture within your HRIS framework, and we'll talk more about that as well. So let's go through each of these. So 1, think of your capabilities as your organization's DNA. What separates you from your competitors? What gives you your comparative advantage? What are the organizational structures and processes that go into it that really give your organization the competitive edge that it needs? What are your leaders saying about it? What do they want to see as your capabilities? And you bring this all into life with looking at abilities, skills, and how to reward those skills and abilities within this DNA. So building your capabilities where you start in this process. 2, designing the right roles. So once you know your capabilities, how do you translate them into the right role design? How do you think about your employee value proposition? How do you think about where you're going to put these roles? What skills are going to go into these roles? What is capturing, what are you capturing in these roles that shows somebody that they should work there versus somewhere else? What are all the basic requirements? You make the role design, but you also have to keep it dynamic, as we discussed. Next, this is where it gets interesting. So you've designed your role through building your capabilities, and designing of the role is, basically the manifestation of your capabilities. But now you need to future-proof them. Again, you can't just let it sit on the shelf and be managed by the rewards department. This has to be part of your talent management process, your talent value chain. You future-proof it by comparing your roles against each other. And I've worked as a practitioner for over a decade for many global companies that didn't really compare what a data scientist looks like in HR versus what a data scientist looks like in their digital marketing department. The requirements and those skills bubbles look very different from role 1 to role 2. And you need to understand why. And also, should these two people talk to each other and understand why their roles are different, but then how could they be similar and how can they transfer some knowledge through those roles? And then how are you rewarding those two roles? If the requirements are very similar or very different, what's the value of those skills? So future proofing is very important to gut check where you are. That's 1. 2 is comparing the data scientist role in HR, for example, to, the people sitting in those roles. How are their skills matching the requirements? I might have had somebody sitting in that role for 10 years, and I need to understand their skills to see if the progressive job description is now still matching what their capabilities are. So that's very important, understanding the skills gaps of your employees. And then 3, comparing the HR data scientist to the market. I might think I'm doing some really cool stuff, but what's everyone else doing? So David mentioned Microsoft being, a front runner in data analytics. Wouldn't you be curious how your organization's data scientist in HR compares to the Microsoft data scientist? That's another skills gap analysis that you should do and think about. And it really helps you think about the skills evolution. It helps you align to your business strategy and your outcomes that you want within that role design. So future-proofing, very, very important. And we'll talk a little bit more later as well. And then the final step is Maintain a dynamic job architecture. You got your capabilities, you designed your roles, you future-proofed them. Now it's a constant cycle to keep it updated in your job architecture. You want to load your job architecture with the most progressive skills and continuously check against the market as well as your employees. But here's the tricky part. How do you do it within your HRIS system? We speak with clients all the time about the fact that they've built a talent strategy, and then now they have to work backwards and say, okay, we built it, but the strategy, how do we now translate it into the tool and keep it dynamic? So we talked about the job analysis and skills mapping. So you get your requirements, you get your employee skills and inference, and you keep it in your job architecture. You future-proof it with doing the gap analysis that we just talked about. Then you want to put those in a dynamic, integrated HRIS system where TA talks to talent acquisition, talks to talent marketplace, talks to your job architecture, talks to your skills framework, talks to your HRIS system. And you want to layer that with a skills ontology, which is guessing and understanding how skills are related. So it's not always the manual intervention of you putting the skills in there. It's not always the employee inference. It's also the ontology AI built into the system that allows you to continuously see what skills are coming up with every role that you're creating if you have an AI skills matching algorithm powering all of this. And then that's not where you stop. Once you still have that dynamic architecture and you've built it into your HRIS ecosystem, then you continuously and actively future-proof it. And there's so many world of possibilities of data analysis and perspectives you can get from future-proofing your build, buy, borrow, bot, break, bounce strategy. So that's a lot to maintain, but it's possible. And as a practitioner, I've done different parts of this, and I think every company tackles different parts of it. But this is sort of the holistic ecosystem where you kind of know everything is informing each other, and it's coming alive, and it's constantly a part of your business process and your business planning. It's not a one-and-done event. So, how do we put it to work, as I mentioned? So once you have this dynamic job architecture, how do you continuously keep it up to date? And what are some exercises you go through to make sure that you're really staying ahead of the competition? Well, there's lots of different ways you can look at it. I usually think about strategic workforce planning as the parable of the elephant. Everyone's touching a different part of the elephant. The entire elephant might not be what you see, the big picture, but it doesn't matter. You're still touching parts of strategic workforce planning. So when you have a dynamic job architecture, it allows you to do a lot more analysis and strategy building. So we talked about skills futuring. How are skills evolving? When you have a dynamic job architecture, you can start measuring the evolution of your skills versus the market skills. You can do location analysis, speaking about hybrid, remote, outsourcing, contingent workforce. What is my location analysis when it comes to the skills that I'm looking for? Skills mapping and gap analysis. We talked about that. It's very important to think of it in three ways: jobs to jobs, jobs to employees, jobs to the market. And then the big question we all have: how will AI disrupt roles and jobs? That's where I put it into the break category of my build, buy, borrow, bounce, break. But break is you look at your roles, and sometimes you need to break the roles and understand what part goes into automation and what part is still kept by the human. We can do those exercises once you have your dynamic job architecture. And then value of skills. Rewards does play a huge role in understanding this dynamic job architecture and how you value progressive skills that are scarce in the market or that you want to attain in the market. So understanding the value of skills is also very important in this dynamic system. And then lastly is talent marketplace. This is where I think all of this comes to life, where you build your talent philosophy around what do you want your employees to do? What do you want them to be guided by? What is their career development look like? And that all comes to life through the dynamic job architecture, understanding and gleaning the insights from your talent marketplace, which houses your people and your capabilities, which is your DNA, which is your comparative advantage. Let's look at some of these in closer cases. So think of the simplest thing, we specialize in this day in and day out at Talent Neuron. We do talent gap analysis. When you think about your strategic workforce plan, if you have a dynamic job architecture, you have your internal demand mapped. It's in that job architecture. You look at your internal supply, you look at external supply, you look at external demand, you do that gap analysis. Then you assess the labor market and you say, what decisions can I make based off the insights that I'm getting from this? And so talent gap analysis is done so much easier when your job architecture is up to date, because inevitably, as our clients do, and I've run into this as a practitioner, you'll do all this advanced analysis and then you get stuck and you say, uh-oh, where do I now put this insights that I've learned? If you don't have a dynamic job architecture, you got to then start building it backwards. And then, of course, inevitably, the next popular project that we work on with our clients is overlaying location analysis to your talent gaps. So how in-depth of a comparison have you made between your talent and where it should sit and what it should look like? And in our new world, it's no longer the full-time employee. It's the contingent worker. It's the freelancer. It's the bot who should really replace a headcount. So when you think about the location, you have to take all of the same considerations into place. What does my job architecture tell me? Where is it in my global footprint? Where are parts of the role sitting? How are they optimized by the locations that I'm choosing, or the remoteness, or the automation side of it? And how do I do the modeling to understand if I'm putting the right capabilities, hence roles, in the right locations with the right job architecture and structure? We talked about this in the beginning, about the skills evolution. It's really important when you're doing any of these exercises to continuously understand how you're thinking about the future of skills progressing. You want to get ahead of where this, curve, what this curve tells you. You don't want to be reactive and look at your job architecture and your roles and see that it has a lot of the declining characteristics, or even the core. Depending on how progressive you want to be, you want to make sure that you're upskilling your organization in the new emerging and growing skill sets. And you're not going to know that unless you really look at your job architecture closely and you do all of those skills gap analysis. I love our little half neuron, half bot from Talent Neuron. He tells us that we have to think about sometimes roles as hybrids. So where is automation going to take us? Do we all of a sudden split a role into two and throw it into the bot and the human? No, sometimes it's a transition. You have to break the role when you understand how it's going to get automated and think about that process. Think about the categorization of where roles go and how you think about the tasks and the skills within those roles. And we help you do that through some modeling of your roles and your critical capabilities to understand where they're going in terms of your automation risk. Think about you've laid your global footprint in a certain location and you're going to do lots of hiring, and then all of a sudden you do this analysis and you find out 25% of those people are going to need to bounce, one of the other B's on my on my model, because you didn't take into consideration your automation risk. And so that's also a very important exercise to do once you have a job architecture in place. So how does this all come together? As I mentioned, Talent Marketplace is really where I think it ties everything together. I've implemented this at several organizations. It really starts with what are our guiding principles? How is leadership supporting this talent philosophy? So it's not just people analytics, holding the beacon of, skills-based organizations alive. It's got to be taking a village of leadership, top-down approach, bottoms-up approach, wanting to invest in the talent marketplace, because your talent philosophy is leading the way in telling your employees, guiding them through, what does my career look like at this organization? How do you value the skills that I'm picking up as I'm zigzagging through the organization? And what are the tools you're giving me to be able to do this work and to develop my career path? So you want to make sure that your talent marketplace isn't just employees going and listing 200 of their favorite skills. It's a combination of skills inferencing, so an AI model that will tell you what your employees should possess within their skills toolbox, as well as them augmenting it with self-identification. It's a combination of the two, and it's up to your talent management how you value those two different ways, and how you encourage people to go in there and stay active, and what types of opportunities you give them within the talent marketplace for them to pick up more skills as they're growing within the organization. The new world of careers, it's not hierarchical, it's more choose your own destiny and being rewarded by picking up more skills, not just titles and hierarchy of moving up. So in that talent philosophy, you want that dynamic job architecture, because as your employees are picking up those skills, and sometimes the inferencing is even suggesting to them, hey, did you know that you're actually good at project management? You should put that on your profile. We have systems that do that now. And when they do that, you want it to be integrated into your HRIS, into your job architecture, so that there's this constant updating going on. And then people analytics can download all of that and do lots of analysis on it. And why do we do all of this? Talent outcomes. You want the talent outcomes to be driving your business strategy. And so, I'm going to end this presentation by, re-emphasizing that your DNA, here we go, went a little too quick, sorry. One more. Let's go back. Here we go. Your DNA is fortified with a dynamic job architecture through all those exercises of analysis and futuring that you need to do to keep it and maintain it. So yes, important of value of skills. Total Rewards usually owns it or co-owns your job architecture with people analytics, and they will continue to monitor it and understand the value. Talent management needs to understand, how do I set goals for my organization for their talent philosophy, and goal setting that's related to skills-based development. And people leaders need to be bought in. When they're hiring a new role, they need to understand the skills they're hiring for. When they're encouraging performance evaluations and work and what's an A player versus a B player, skills should be part of that conversation. Talent development, the employee takes responsibility of their own destiny in being excited to work for a company where they're allowed to pick up new skills and zigzag through the organization and be rewarded for them. And you tie that all together with strategic workforce planning. It's all a wonderful dynamic ecosystem that you build when you get all of the insights that people analytics folks will bring up and highlight to the CHRO and the business to say, we have all this data, and this is what the data is telling us as we continuously monitor the market in the build, buy, borrow, bot, break, bounce strategy. So it paints this progressive picture of what your capabilities are, what your role design should be, and how you future-proof that and make sure you're maintaining it with your biggest assets, your employees. Thank you so much. That's my presentation. I'm staying up here.
Thanks. Yes, you're staying up here for questions now. We've got around 10 minutes for questions. The network doesn't appear to be working. So if anyone has asked a question via the app, I can't see it. So we're going to do questions in the traditional sense. So if you put your hand up, then we've got a few people running with mics in there. So yes, we've got a question here.
Hi, good morning. Good morning.
Hi.
Thank you for the information, very informative. What strategies have been most effective in your experience for aligning job architecture with the gig economy and the growing demand for more flexible project-based work structures?
I think it's the talent marketplace. That's really where you bring it alive. You want to think about roles as not just full-time roles, contingent roles, flexible roles, freelancers, and short-term assignments. When you build that into the philosophy of the talent marketplace with a very progressive tool that you use to reinforce the strategy and the business principles, that's where you then start seeing the results, measuring the KPIs, and then making sure you're marketing it to the company to show the value proposition of it, while also embedding it in your EVP so that new employees and new people leaders understand the value and that ecosystem of why you've built a talent marketplace that caters to different types of roles, whether they're, contingent, freelance, all of that. And also where they need to think about automation and getting ahead of it.
And on that, Ellen, are you seeing more companies now? Because traditionally, HR looked at permanent workers, procurement looks at contingent workers. Are you seeing that blending together? A lot more?
Absolutely. As a former head of global TA, I always vied for me looking across my workforce for my CHRO. And there's systems now that blend those two populations together within the HRIS. It's all about understanding the strategy and picking the right partner in your technology tools. And nowadays, there's so many advanced technology tools that are able to do this. So if you're people analytics folks, I encourage all of you to get involved in the process when you're picking the tools of your organization, whether understanding where does my job architecture live, how does it connect to the talent marketplace, how does it connect to talent acquisition. They should not be two systems. They should all be talking to each other, like I mentioned in the dynamic ecosystem.
Thank you. Thanks for the first question as well of the event. Anyone else? Yep, we've got a question there.
Hi. Hi. So we've been on our skills journey for about 3 years now. We're currently building out a skills architecture. So I have a question when it comes to validating and controlling for self-reported skills, which highly influence our architecture. How do you control for some of the proficiency levels and continue to validate those self-reported skills?
That's a good question. So we've all built skills-based approaches, but measuring the proficiency has been the next step, and it's been tough for a lot of organizations to understand that. I would suggest quantifiable hard skills being the first place you think about measuring, because technical skills are easier to measure. Talent assessments come very much in handy. Nowadays, there's very advanced talent assessment strategies where you can assess an employee by having a conversational AI assessment, where they don't even feel like you're measuring them for skills. They're just having a conversation. There's different methods of measuring, and it depends on what role, what skills you're measuring, and then how that ties back to the importance of that role design. So I think once you understand the role design, what are the critical skills in that role design, then build assessment strategies and tools that help in a supportive way for the employee to understand, well, where am I in these new progressive skills that my management is asking me to be. That would be one method of recommendation.
Good question. Yep.
Hi.
Hi there. So it's kind of a prequel to that question. Could you speak to organizations that are resistant to even starting a skills journey in a skills marketplace?
Absolutely.
And a lot of the question is about, well, there's no way to really measure it, but
Yeah.
it seems very valuable.
I like the stealth mode of building a skills-based organization through recruiting. Every manager has to recruit, and every employee touches recruiting somehow by being an interviewer. When you start building a skills-based organization through recruiting, it just naturally becomes part of the process where you're looking at using a tool that shows candidates through a skills lens. And that's where they kind of see the aha moment, where you're presenting candidates to them through a skills lens and not a pedigree lens and not through degrees. They start looking at it and they go, oh, I didn't know Susie was the same level of skills, match as Johnny. I always thought Johnny was going to be my number one in this role. It might be an internal compared to an external. When they start looking at that, it starts influencing their thinking about, interesting, I wouldn't have known. It really kind of chases the biases that I had and debunks them. And they start thinking from the organizational view, skills-based. And then when they bring that person who does have the skills match into the organization, then they have to start thinking about, okay, well, I brought this person for this skill. How does that compare to what I want them to do? And then that's where talent management comes in and talent development comes in. So when you tie recruiting to that, it's like the first place where it's natural for them to start learning it. You don't even have to call it skills-based. You just kind of introduce them to the tool. I mean, from an organizational perspective, you block and tackle each leader who's looking at the recruiting and you explain to them, oh, we're going to a new skills-based approach and here's the benefits of it. And this is where recruiters come in to become talent advisors. They're not reactive note takers to, oh, you want this? Okay, let me go get that for you. It's more of a conversation, consultative approach where having a tool like Talent Neuron helps them look at the market and have more intelligent conversations with their hiring managers to understand, why am I designing the role this way, and who are the people that are going to match it the best, comparing it to internals versus externals. So that would be my recommendation.
And I guess you can also start in a function. So, for instance, I don't know, if you've got a technology function, for example, and you're struggling to hire and retain certain skills, that might be a place to start, because you've got a business leader who's got a need, and maybe you'll get on it, and then you can kind of prove the value perhaps as well.
Absolutely. Pilots, you're all HR professionals. Pilots are the way to go. Do a pilot in a certain organization where people leaders are believing in wanting to do it. Get them to be the influencers, and then once it's working and you gather some good stats and KPIs, then use that to influence other business leaders, and use that leader to champion the change. That's really important, to have the influential change management through leadership come through those pilots.
Okay. Any other questions?
Right over here.
3 really good questions so far. Yes.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your time. Question around change management around all of this, because historically, and I don't even want to say historically, even now, Total Rewards has owned the job architecture conversation, right? And so we're 2 years into our skills journey and tackling the job architecture and building out our skills architecture piece, and wondering what are some kind of success stories or points that you could guide us on in terms of convincing them to integrate and work with talent management and people analytics in order to roll something like this out, right? So I think a lot of times the technology works across silos, but the people don't, right? And we're finding, those of us on the skills teams and the skills architecture teams, that this is a much bigger change management effort than we anticipated.
2 parts of that. I do think that there needs to be a change management plan, communications, success stories, champions from leadership, marketing, embedding it in your EVP. Those are all part of the change management side. Tying it to your business principles and your business strategy. It's not just something that HR concocted. It's a partnership with the business to understand, why are we doing this? What outcomes is this going to drive? Which is why I ended my presentation on talent outcomes. How does this help us do better strategic workforce planning? How does that help us upskill our organization? What are some success stories? That's the change management approach. And then the HR operating model is a whole other thing to tackle, where you want to break those silos. And I'm a firm believer that the most important role in HR is people analytics and chief talent officer, or someone who overlooks the talent value chain. You need those 2 champions to bring the data and couple it with the strategy to break those silos across the HR operating model. If you're siloed, this is going to be an uphill battle for the one department that's trying to hold up the skills flag. So those are my recommendations, is making sure that you're tying the change management to your business outcomes and being able to market that and have champions for it. And then on the other side, breaking the silos down through maybe a champion within HR. Even if you don't have that chief talent officer role, having someone as a proxy for that, whether it's the CHRO or whether it's even the rewards person leader coming in and saying, listen, I'd like to get everyone together. We're going to do this together, and we need to be united because these are the implications and the data that it's telling us. It's imperative for us to go in this direction. And if we need to upskill HR and bring them together, then that's what's necessary, because otherwise it's such a organizational shift. You can't just do it alone. It does take a village within HR for us all together.
And we got time for one more question, I think, over there. I think you're preaching to the converted in this room when you say people analytics is the most important role in HR as well.
I know my audience.
Hi. So for the last question around the change management piece, can you talk about change management from the employee side? So where we have challenges in our organization is around the analyst. Right. And they're all trained to kind of go analyst 1, analyst 2, analyst 3. Mm-hmm. And we need to, in this discussion, talk about how do I convince an analyst 3 to take a parallel role and build new skills that potentially could lead them into better roles in the future, but is not necessarily going to give them a pay increase or responsibility increase. It's just going to change the dynamic of the skill that is involved that they're learning in that new role. So can you talk about that piece?
Yeah. It's about building your talent philosophy and making sure that you're communicating it through the business. Again, it's not an HR pet project, as David mentioned in his presentation. This is the way the CEO should be talking to the organization about their talent philosophy, tying this talent philosophy of saying, I value skills, I value progressive skills. HR gives you the tools to understand what skills will help you move through our organization. And flattening the organization helps in that endeavor. So you just mentioned the layers of the analyst. I've noticed that at companies where there's a flatter organization, people are chasing the skill and not the title and the promotion. They get rewarded through picking up skills, putting it on their profile, making it very visible. I have these skills. This is my profile. These are the assignments I've taken. These are the roles that have taught me certain skills, and I'm getting rewarded for that versus my title has gone up because I've been sitting in the seat for 2 years and now I'm ready. So it's more about skills guiding that through your talent philosophy and your leadership endorsing it. And also leadership not hoarding talent, really believing in the talent marketplace. And the reason why they hoard the talent is because they're afraid if they let A player Susie go, it's going to take a long time for them to replace Susie. But when you have a dynamic talent marketplace where you're in a flat organization where you're moving people around all the time and it's expected for you to be moving around, then the manager feels confident that if I let Susie go, then I'm going to get Joe in her place in no time, and I want to be part of this talent philosophy, and I should be rewarded for being a talent exporter, not always being a talent importer. So I think it's important to think of it that way as well. So it's talent philosophy, leadership reinforcement, and giving them the right tools to show the dynamic system of that coming alive.
Great. Well, some really good questions, and I think that augurs well for the next 2 days, but it also, I think, emphasizes the importance of this topic and also the quality of the content and the knowledge that we've heard from Ellen over the last half hour. Ellen,
Absolutely.
thank you very much.
Thank you.